Benton County man sentenced to death for the 2012 murder of 6-year-old Jersey Bridgeman is set to appear before an Arkansas Supreme Court this Thursday. Prosecutors say Holly kidnapped, sexually assaulted, and strangled the child. A jury sentenced him to death in 2015. Holly has since filed multiple appeals, including claims his attorneys failed to present evidence of long-term mental illness, but those efforts have been denied. Now, justices will hear new oral arguments that could impact his sentence.
She said, "I love you" to the moon and back, and then she was gone. Not in the way people say that about someone who grew old and lived a full life. Gone as in, her mother tucked her in, closed her eyes for a few hours, and when she went to check on her daughter the next morning, the bed was empty. No broken window, no forced door, no signs of a struggle, nothing. Just silence where a 6-year-old little girl used to be. And here's what's going to stay with you long after this video ends. Jersey Bridgeman didn't disappear into the night from some dangerous neighborhood or from a home where people weren't paying attention. She vanished from a street where everyone knew each other, where neighbors looked out for each other, where her mother had every reason to believe her daughter was safe. She was found less than an hour later, 2 houses down, in an abandoned building. And the person responsible? He wasn't a stranger lurking in the shadows. He wasn't someone the family had been warned about. He was the man Jersey called Uncle Zack, the same man who babysat her, the same man who stood behind the police tape that morning watching officers respond to the scene, and the same man who, when the cameras turned to him, shook his head and said he had absolutely no idea what had happened to that little girl. What unfolded next, the investigation, the confession, the things that came out in that courtroom, is one of the most disturbing cases the state of Arkansas has ever seen. And before this video is over, you're going to understand exactly how evil hides. Not in dark alleyways, not behind monster faces, but behind familiar smiles, open front doors, and the words, "Don't worry, I'll watch the kids tonight." Stay with me, because this story, every layer of it, deserves to be told. Before we get into it, drop a comment right now. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? I read every single one, and I genuinely want to know who's out here with me tonight. Okay, let's go. To understand this case fully, you have to understand where it happened, because place matters in true crime. The setting shapes the story in ways that most people don't immediately recognize. And in this case, the setting makes everything feel even more impossible. This takes us to Arkansas, the natural state, as people there call it. And honestly, when you see it, you understand why. It is a place of quiet, rolling beauty that doesn't announce itself the way other states do. The Ozark Mountains stretch across the northwest corner of the state like a green wave frozen in time, ancient and enormous and calm. The Buffalo National River, the first national river ever designated in the United States, cuts through limestone bluffs so clean and sharp they look like something out of a painting nobody asked permission to make. Hot springs rise from deep in the earth in pale, misty columns. Forests go on for what feels like forever in every direction. People who love Arkansas love it for its pace. It doesn't have the electric, relentless chaos of New York City, or the sprawling industrial ambition of Houston, or the permanent golden haze of Los Angeles. It moves slower. It breathes differently. Neighbors tend to know each other's names, not because they've been told to, but because on a quiet street in a place like this, you just do. Communities form around schools, churches, Friday night football games, and shared back roads. In many parts of the state, you still get the feeling of what older America felt like. A little quieter, a little more trusting, a little more connected in the small ways that matter. Bentonville sits in the northwest corner of the state, in Benton County. In recent years, it has grown considerably, pulled upward by the presence of Walmart's global headquarters and a steady wave of new residents and businesses building around it. But at its heart, Bentonville still carries the character of a smaller city, the kind of place where a neighborhood street is a real community, where kids ride their bikes outside without anyone thinking twice, where a family can move into a new house and feel, within a few days, like they've always been there. It was on one of those streets, Southeast A Street, that a family was trying to start over, and it was on that same street that everything came apart. Now, To really feel the weight of what happened to Jersey Bridgeman, you have to go back further than the night she disappeared. You have to go all the way to the beginning of her short life. Because this little girl had already been through things no child should ever have to survive, long before that final night in November. Jersey came into this world with parents who were no longer together by the time she was old enough to understand much of anything. Her mother, Desiree, and her father, David, shared custody of her, an arrangement that, on paper, sounds functional. 2 homes, 2 parents, 1 little girl moving between them, trying to make sense of a world that was already more complicated than it should have been for someone her age. But what was happening inside her father David's home was anything but functional. Jersey was 6 years old, barely old enough for kindergarten, barely old enough to tie her own shoes with confidence, and she was living in conditions that no child should ever be asked to endure. According to her own account, conditions she eventually found the courage to describe to a child care professional when she could no longer carry it alone. Jersey was made to sleep on the floor at night, not on a sleeping bag, not on a mat, the floor. And if she tried to stand up, on her own, if she tried to move toward food, if she tried to just exist the way a child exists, the reaction from the adults in that house was immediate and harsh. They restrained her. Let that land for a second. They restrained a 6-year-old girl with makeshift devices, things that had absolutely no connection to child safety, no legitimate purpose, to restrict her movement, to control where she could go and what she could do inside her own home. Police in Rogers, Arkansas, first became aware of the situation after Jersey was seen physically restrained near furniture. Officers who investigated her father's household found an environment that deeply alarmed them. David admitted to investigators that he had restrained his daughter. His explanation was that he believed Jersey might wander in her sleep. He said he and his partner had discussed installing proper child safety equipment, baby gates, door alarms, standard things, but that financial difficulties had stopped them from ever following through. So instead of a baby gate, they used a belt. And when Jersey started complaining about pain, what her small body told her that something was wrong with what was being done to her, the adults didn't stop. They didn't reconsider. They adapted. They changed how the restraints were positioned. They made it tighter, more layered, more restrictive, more difficult for a child to find relief. The problem wasn't solved. It was reshaped. Toward the end of 2011, David and his partner Jana were arrested. David pleaded guilty to multiple serious charges: child abuse, creating dangerous living conditions. He was sentenced to 18 years in prison. Jana pleaded guilty to similar charges and received 12 years, plus an additional 3 years when a suspended sentence was revoked. And Jersey finally got out. She was placed permanently in the care of her biological mother, Desiree, and she began the slow, tentative work of becoming a child again. She started kindergarten at Sugar Creek Elementary. She adjusted gradually to a daily routine that no longer included fear as a baseline. Teachers remembered her. Family friends remembered her. Everyone who spent time around her in that period remembered one thing above everything else. She smiled, really smiled, the kind of smile that came from somewhere deep and genuine and didn't hold anything back. One family friend said it exactly right. She always laughed. She had the biggest smile you could have. She made sure you saw all her teeth. She took enormous pride in being a big sister to Leah, who was just 2 years old. She was tender with her in that protective, intuitive way that children who have known real uncertainty sometimes develop, like she understood. Even at 6, that love wasn't something you could afford to leave implied. You showed it. You said it out loud. You said it every single chance you got. In March of 2012, Desiree moved the family into a house at 608 Southeast A Street in Bentonville. And almost immediately, life started to feel different, better, like something had finally shifted in a direction worth moving toward. Living nearby were Amanda and Zachary Holly, a young married couple, quiet, present, the kind of neighbors who make a new house feel like a home just by being there. Amanda and Desiree became close quickly. They spent time together. They supported each other through the ordinary and extraordinary pressures of young motherhood. And Zachary, friendly, low-key, reliable, became a natural fixture in Jersey's world. She called him Uncle Zack. From the outside, It looked like exactly what it appeared to be. A fresh start taking hold. A community forming around a family that had needed one. For the first time in her short life, Jersey Bridgeman seemed to have something that looked like safety. She was 6 days past her 6th birthday when that illusion shattered completely. November 19th, 2012. A Monday evening. Desiree had a work shift and couldn't be home with the girls, so she made the arrangement she had made many times before. Jersey and 2-year-old Leah would stay next door with Amanda and Zachary for the evening. This was not unusual. Not remotely. It had become part of the rhythm of life on that block. Desiree worked. The Hollis watched the kids. The evening passed, and everything ran the way it was supposed to run. No one had any reason to think about it twice. Desiree came home from her shift around 11 o'clock that night. She went next door and collected her daughters. Zachary was there. Amanda was there. Everything was as it should have been. Desiree carried little Leah home. Jersey walked beside her, soft and sleepy the way children are at that hour. That heavy, comfortable sleepiness that means the day is done. She put both girls to bed together, the same bed they had shared many times before. And just before Jersey's eyes closed, she looked up at her mother one more time. "I love you to the moon and back." That was the last thing they ever said to each other. The next morning, November 20th, 2012, 6 days after Jersey's 6th birthday, Desiree woke up and walked into the bedroom. The bed was there. Leah was there. The room was quiet and ordinary in all the ways rooms are quiet and ordinary in the early morning. Jersey was not there. Desiree called her name. Searched the house, every room, every closet, the spaces under the bed, the small corners where a 6-year-old might curl up and hide for reasons only a 6-year-old could explain. She moved from room to room, calling out, listening for a response that didn't come. She called her own mother. Together they searched again. Under the bed, inside the closet, every place a child could reasonably fit. Still nothing. I want you to understand what it feels like in that moment, because this matters. When a parent cannot find their child, when the ordinary places turn up nothing, and the calling of a name goes unanswered for long enough, a specific kind of terror takes hold. It's not like ordinary fear. It has a physical quality to it. It moves through your body and changes the way you breathe, the way you think, the way your legs carry you from one room to the next. It is the particular panic of a parent in the wrong kind of silence. That is what Desiree was living through. She looked out the window and saw Amanda Holly sitting on the porch next door. She went over immediately. Had Amanda seen Jersey? Had she come back over in the night, for any reason? Amanda said no. And that was the moment everything accelerated. That single no made the fear worse in a way that is difficult to describe, because now the last person who might have a different answer didn't have one. The circle of possibility had just gotten smaller, and none of the remaining possibilities were good. Desiree called 911 at 6:43 in the morning. The address, 608 Southeast A Street. The report, a missing child. Law enforcement responded without delay. When a child is reported missing, every minute of the early response matters. The decisions made in the first hour can change the trajectory of the entire investigation. Officers arrived quickly and began searching immediately. The Bridgeman home, the surrounding property, the Holly residence next door, every accessible area within immediate reach. Jersey wasn't found. No signs of forced entry anywhere. No evidence that anything had been disturbed. No broken locks, no damaged doors, no indication of a struggle. The houses looked the way houses look on quiet mornings, ordinary, still, and locked in their own silence. And then Officer Travis Nichols noticed something. 2 houses down, at the property on number 74, the back door was standing open, wide open. Every other house on the block had its doors closed. Not that one. Nichols moved toward it with Officer Mike Henson. They could see through the door, debris on the floor, the deep stillness of a building that hadn't been lived in for a while. They entered carefully, moving through the rooms the way trained officers move through unknown spaces, methodical and deliberate. When they reached the bedroom, they stopped. There was a person on the floor. They exited immediately, secured the scene, called for an official warrant before anyone returned inside. Proper procedure, followed with precision. even as the weight of what they had just seen settled over everyone on that street like a physical thing. Jersey's grandmother, Vicky, arrived at the scene not long after. She walked toward one of the officers, her face tight with a fear that hadn't fully named itself yet. She asked quietly, "Is Jersey in there?" The officer couldn't answer. He just looked at her. And in that look, Vicky said later, she understood everything. She didn't need words. The expression on his face told her the only thing there was to know. Jersey Bridgeman had been found in the bedroom of the abandoned property at number 74 Southeast A Street, 2 houses from where she lived, 2 houses from the bed where her mother had held her and kissed her goodnight and heard her say, "I love you to the moon and back." Outside on the curb, a small bicycle still sat where Jersey had left it, the way children leave their bikes when they expect to come back. On the ground nearby, a deflated princess balloon lay without air, without motion, without the brightness it had when it was new. These small, ordinary things, a bike, a balloon, objects that belonged to childhood in the way that only everyday objects can, felt completely unbearable in that moment. They were the fingerprints of a normal life that had just been taken. Jersey's maternal grandfather was called upon to do the most devastating thing a grandparent can be asked to do. He formally identified his granddaughter. There are no words for what that moment was. There's only the weight of it. At 6:43 that morning, a call went out. By mid-morning, a street was sealed off with police tape. News cameras had arrived. Journalists were setting up positions. Live broadcasts were starting to roll. Neighbors stepped onto their porches and spoke to each other in low voices because the full picture wasn't visible yet. Only the tape and the officers and the awful, mounting certainty that something had happened that could not be undone. The investigation that followed was immediate, serious, and exhaustive. With support from the FBI, law enforcement began moving through the neighborhood methodically, interviewing residents, running background checks, chasing down every thread that might lead somewhere useful. The police captain made a statement. Everyone who had been close to Jersey, everyone who had had any contact with her or with the household, would be examined. No exceptions. Among those brought in to give statements was Amanda Holly. Her account was consistent with everything Desiree had already told officers. She confirmed that both girls had been with her and Zachary that evening. She confirmed that Jersey went home with her mother later that night. Her story had no contradictions, no hesitations, no gaps. It lined up cleanly with the existing timeline. Then officers turned to her husband, Zachary. On the surface, Zachary Holly was unremarkable in the way that most people are unremarkable from the outside. 28 years old, worked at a local restaurant, lived quietly with his wife and her young son. There was a prior history with law enforcement, 3 separate incidents, including a public incident and 2 violations of court requirements, but nothing that screamed dangerous, nothing that flagged him immediately as the kind of person investigators needed to look at harder. But investigators looked harder anyway, because that is how real investigations work. You look at everyone, you look carefully, and you follow the thread wherever it goes, even when it leads somewhere you didn't expect. Zachary's childhood, they began to learn, had been defined by instability in ways that were genuinely severe. His mother had struggled with addiction throughout his early years, unable to provide a safe or consistent home environment. He had grown up without the kind of foundation that most children take entirely for granted. A stable address, a familiar school, adults who showed up reliably and meant it. He had lived in 9 different homes. He had attended 23 different schools. 15 separate child welfare investigations had been opened regarding his family during his childhood years, 15, and the system had largely failed him, repeatedly returning him to unsafe situations, losing track of him in the space between procedures and paperwork. None of that was visible from the outside. From the outside, he was just a neighbor, a friendly face, Uncle Zack. During questioning, Zachary told investigators that he had woken in the early morning hours of November 20th feeling suddenly sick to his stomach. He said he didn't want to wake his wife or disturb the household, so he slipped out quietly and walked approximately 150 yards down the road to the Easy Mart convenience store to pick up something for the nausea. He returned home, went back to bed, and didn't speak to anyone until morning. When Desiree came over to say Jersey was missing, he said, The news hit him out of nowhere. Surveillance footage from Easy Mart confirmed his presence at the store. The timestamp read 3:35 in the morning. Investigators noted that detail and kept moving. They confirmed the alibi of Desiree's boyfriend, Brandon. He had been working his shift through the night, verifiable and solid. They began comparing timelines, overlapping movements, building the map of who was where and when. And here is the detail that kept pulling focus. That same Easy Mart, the one Zachary had gone to at 3:35 in the morning, was where Brandon worked. The store that appeared in Zachary's alibi was the same store where Desiree's boyfriend was confirmed to have been working all night. It might mean nothing. It might be pure coincidence. But experienced investigators treat coincidences the same way a doctor treats unusual symptoms. You don't dismiss them just because there's an innocent explanation. You document, you watch, and you wait to see if the pattern develops. Zachary maintained, firmly and consistently, that he had nothing to do with whatever had happened to Jersey. He appeared willing to cooperate fully. He voluntarily handed over the clothes he had been wearing the previous night. He provided a DNA sample without being pressured into it. He said he wanted police to find whoever was responsible. He said all the right things in all the right ways. But the investigation continued to narrow. Now, I want you to sit with something for just a moment before we go further, because this is the part of cases like this one that I find genuinely haunting. Amanda was right next door. The children had been trusted to these two people regularly, comfortably, without hesitation. Jersey knew Zachary. She ran to him. She had a name for him, a name built from trust and familiarity and the ordinary affection of a child toward an adult who has always been kind to her. When evil looks like this, when it looks like a neighbor, a babysitter, a familiar face at the end of the street, how do you see it coming? How does a parent protect against something that doesn't look like what it is? I want your thoughts on that. Seriously, leave them in the comments below, because this question sits at the center of this case, and I don't think anyone has an easy answer. The forensic examination of Jersey's body was conducted at the Arkansas State Crime Lab, and the findings were delivered with the clinical precision of pathology reports, which does not make them easier to process, only more exact. Jersey Bridgeman died due to a lack of oxygen. The examination also documented what would later be described in court as severe violations of a child's bodily integrity, language that is cold and formal and still somehow inadequate for what it is describing. Forensic specialists at the crime lab worked through Thanksgiving without stopping. They were trying to extract a usable, complete DNA profile from biological material collected during the examination. The work was painstaking and methodical, and they did not slow down for holidays or for anything else. The community around Jersey's family did not slow down either, though in a different way. Sugar Creek Elementary deployed counselors for students and parents. More than 100 people gathered at the Children's Advocacy Center for a candlelight memorial, standing together in the November cold, quiet and shaken, holding flames that flickered in the wind but didn't go out. Beverly Engel, the center's executive director, said of Jersey that she had something special, like a little old soul inside her, but at the same time, pure joy. Purple ribbons began appearing in the neighborhood. Purple had already become Jersey's color. Her kindergarten classmates and teachers had worn it to honor her, and now it spread across the block where she had lived, hanging from porches and mailboxes and front doors, a quiet, visible refusal to let the neighborhood forget. A week into the investigation, Zachary Holly did something unexpected. He reached out to investigators and told them he wanted to take a polygraph examination. Voluntarily. He said he wanted to help them find the person responsible. He said he wanted to clear his name. He said he was willing to do whatever it took. Investigators agreed. The exam was scheduled and conducted. 3 days later, the results came back, and Zachary was called back to the police station. He came in, sat down, and an investigator looked at him across the table and told him what the results showed. The polygraph indicated deception. He had failed the test. And then, the DNA matches your DNA. What followed, investigators would later describe as the moment the entire case turned. Zachary continued to insist on his innocence, at first. He held to that for a little while. The same insistence he had maintained since the beginning. The same cooperative surface. The same firm denial. But investigators had spent weeks doing something deliberate and careful. They had withheld specific details from every press conference, every public statement, every piece of information that went out to the media. Facts about the scene. Details about the specific conditions of what had happened. Information that only one kind of person would know, because only one kind of person was there. And in that interrogation room, the strategy paid off, because Zachary began to talk. And what came out of his mouth were things he should not have known if he had been asleep in his bed all night. The details were specific. They matched. They fit the scene investigators had been quietly building around him for weeks. And then Zachary Holly picked up a pencil, and he drew a layout of the house, the abandoned building at number 74. He drew the hallway. He drew where the bathroom was. He marked the exact location inside that building where he had left Jersey Bridgeman. It was over. Zachary Dwayne Holly was arrested that evening. The charges: capital murder, kidnapping, residential burglary. He was taken into custody and transported to jail. The same man who had stood behind the police tape on the morning of November 20th, watching officers search the block. The same man in the blue striped beanie and the black jacket, his face arranged in an expression of concern, looking like just another horrified neighbor trying to make sense of a tragedy. The same man Jersey had called Uncle Zack. The community's reaction was immediate and completely raw. Anger, grief, a disbelief that wanted to solidify into belief, but kept hitting a wall. How could someone that close, that trusted, that ordinary, how could they have done something like this? People kept asking that question, not because they expected an answer, but because the question is what you ask when the answer is completely beyond your comprehension. The day after his arrest, Julie Picard, a neighbor who lived on the other side of the house where Jersey had been found, told investigators that Zachary had appeared in visible, extreme distress on the morning after the discovery. He was shaken, overwhelmed, not trying to hide how upset he was. She also noted that officers had asked her something specific during one of their conversations, whether she had seen a man wearing pajama pants with a Mountain Dew design on them. That was the clothing Zachary had been wearing around that time. Small detail, carefully documented. In the Benton County Jail, while awaiting his first court appearance, an incident occurred. Another inmate gained access to Zachary's cell during the distribution of clothing and towels, and a confrontation took place. It was quickly contained. No serious injuries resulted, but the reaction from the public was what you might expect when a case this charged, this raw, this close to the bone, produces a moment of informal consequence. Some people felt a grim satisfaction. Others pointed out that the justice system existed precisely to prevent exactly that. The jail captain stated clearly that every effort would be made to keep Zachary safe, like any other inmate, because that was the institution's obligation regardless of the charges. What mattered was what happened in the courtroom, and the courtroom was where everything now moved. Jersey's funeral was held at a cemetery in Bentonville. Students and staff from her kindergarten wore purple. The Bentonville Police Department provided a full escort for her funeral procession. Officers from the same department that had found her, that had worked through the night, that had built the case that led to an arrest. Her father, David, was denied temporary release from prison to attend. He was not there for his daughter's final goodbye. Desiree, asked in the days that followed how she was holding on, said, "I'm going to keep loving my other girls, keep going as a mom." She said it had been like an ongoing funeral for so long, and now, finally, they could stop focusing on the nightmare. They could remember Jersey, the real Jersey, the one with the smile that showed all her teeth. Zachary Holly appeared before the court in standard jail clothing, moving in silence, his face blank and distant. He entered a not guilty plea and was held without the option of bail. His attorneys received their assignment, and the case entered its legal phase. 2 independent psychiatric evaluations were conducted, one initiated by the prosecution, one by the defense, each conducted separately, neither coordinated with the other. Both arrived at the same conclusion: Zachary Holly was mentally competent to stand trial. He understood the nature of the charges against him. He was capable of fully engaging with his legal defense. That finding removed the last procedural question about whether the case could move forward. It could. It would. The proceedings hit an unexpected and painful interruption when one of Zachary's defense attorneys formally informed the court that he could no longer continue representing the defendant. He cited serious personal psychological strain and stated openly that he could not guarantee the quality of representation his client was entitled to receive. He acknowledged significant personal difficulties. The court accepted the withdrawal, appointed new counsel, and the case was delayed again. For Jersey's family, every delay was another wound. Every postponement meant another month of waiting, another month of hearings and continuances, while the case moved at the pace of legal procedure instead of the pace of grief. But the system moved as it must, and eventually, a new attorney was in place, and the trial moved into its active phase. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere carried the specific weight that high-profile trials carry, the sense that everyone in the room understands, without being told, that something consequential is happening, that the outcome will matter beyond these four walls. One of the central witnesses for the prosecution was Dr. Frank Petty, the state medical examiner. His testimony was among the most difficult for anyone in that courtroom to sit through. He explained, in the precise and careful language of forensic pathology, the physiological mechanisms behind the cause of Jersey's death. Asphyxiation, the deprivation of oxygen. He described the body's response to that kind of event, the immediate, overpowering fear, the overwhelming physical drive to breathe, the rapid exhaustion that follows. He described, clinically and professionally, what happens to the human body in the final minutes of that kind of death. He noted indicators suggesting that Jersey had instinctively tried to save herself in those critical moments. He delivered all of this in the measured, controlled tone of a medical professional who has spent a career learning to hold that distance between clinical language and human reality. But in the courtroom, that distance collapsed, because everyone in that room knew who they were talking about. They knew she was 6 years old. They knew she had worn a purple dress. They knew she had a little sister named Leah and a bicycle parked at the curb, and a phrase she used with everyone she loved. The courtroom fell into a specific kind of silence, not the ordinary quiet of legal procedure, a deeper kind, the kind that settles in when a room full of people is trying, collectively, to stay composed. When photographs from the forensic examination were displayed for the jury, the atmosphere shifted again. A wave of tension moved through the room. Some people looked away. Others couldn't stop tears from falling. Zachary Holly sat with his head lowered, his face distant and unmoving, showing no visible reaction to images from a scene that he had created. DNA analyst Melissa Main took the stand and addressed the jury with the careful, systematic precision that forensic scientists bring to their testimony. She explained that Zachary Holly was the primary potential source of DNA identified across multiple independent samples taken during the examination. His profile had been detected on 2 separate swabs. She used her words exactly as her scientific training required. She could not state with 100% certainty. That is not what forensic DNA science claims. But she could say with equal confidence that he could not be excluded. He cannot be excluded. That phrase, delivered in a quiet courtroom with the jury watching, carried weight that went beyond its technical meaning. It was the scientific way of saying, the evidence points here. It leads to this man, right here in this room. The defense strategy, when it became visible, was unexpected. They called no witnesses during the main phase of the trial. In their opening statement and again in their closing argument, the defense attorneys essentially acknowledged what the evidence had already established, that their client bore responsibility for Jersey's death. It was a calculated move, and everyone in that courtroom understood what it meant. They had given up on the verdict. They were playing for the sentence. The jury deliberated briefly. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty. Unlawful entry into a residence. Unlawful restraint of a child. Severe violations of bodily integrity. Intentional taking of a life. Guilty on all counts. The penalty phase began almost immediately, a separate proceeding with one question at its center. Not what Zachary Holly did. That had been established. The question now was what should happen to him for doing it. And this is where the case became genuinely complicated in a way that courts are built to navigate, and that human beings find genuinely difficult. The defense called a representative from California's Department of Human Services, the state where Zachary had grown up. His attorneys laid out his life in full. 9 different homes before he reached adulthood. 23 different schools. 15 child welfare investigations open, reviewed, and closed without resulting in lasting change. A mother who struggled with addiction throughout his childhood and could not provide anything resembling stable care. A system that removed him from an unsafe environment once, and then returned him to it far too quickly, and then lost track of him entirely. The DHS caseworker who testified made a candid, painful admission on the stand. She said that Zachary and his family had essentially been lost within the child welfare system, caught in the space between procedures, between paperwork, between caseworkers who changed and files that didn't transfer cleanly, and a bureaucracy that was built to process cases rather than to truly protect children. She confirmed that the agency had failed to take actions that might genuinely have changed the course of Zachary's development. She said it directly, without softening it. The courtroom received that testimony in silence. Because here is the impossible thing about that moment. None of it changes what happened to Jersey. None of it undoes what was done to a 6-year-old child in an abandoned house 2 doors from where she lived. Systemic failure does not produce absolution. A difficult childhood does not create permission. The jury understood that, and they also understood that they were being asked to carry the weight of a decision that would not be clean or simple or free from moral complexity, because those decisions never are, when they're being made honestly. The judge read the jury instructions for more than 30 minutes. Aggravating factors, mitigating factors, the legal standards that applied, the weight of the responsibility each juror carried. You could feel, in the way those instructions were delivered, the enormity of what was about to happen. The jury returned. Zachary Holly was sentenced to 20 years for unlawful entry into a residence, for the violations against Jersey's bodily integrity and the restraint of a child, 2 life sentences, and for the killing itself, taking into account circumstances the court found to be especially aggravating. The judge imposed the harshest punishment Arkansas law allows, death. When the sentence was read, the courtroom fell into the deepest silence of the entire trial. Something had been decided. Something was final. The legal machinery that had been turning for months had reached its endpoint, and what it had produced was a sentence that could not be appealed away, could not be delayed into irrelevance, could not be softened by time. Each defense attorney walked to the jury box and individually asked each juror to confirm that the verdict was unanimous. Each juror said yes. After sentencing, Zachary Holly was given the opportunity to speak. The first time he had spoken publicly during the trial, he said, "I sincerely apologize for the pain and suffering I've caused. I hope you can one day find it in your heart to forgive me." Then he was handcuffed and taken from the room. Desiree, outside, said, "I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep loving my girls. We can finally stop living in the nightmare. We can remember her. We can remember the good times. We get to remember our baby." Zachary Holly was housed on death row at the Varner Supermax unit. His legal team filed appeals, challenging the trial procedure, the court's rulings on specific motions, the admissibility of statements he had made during police interrogation. He argued that the jury should have been formally informed of his willingness to plead guilty to one of the charges, and that this should have been weighed as a mitigating factor during sentencing. He raised a third argument about the denial of a directed verdict motion on the residential burglary charge. The Arkansas Supreme Court reviewed the appeal in full and upheld the conviction on every count. The court found the defense arguments insufficient to overturn the lower court's rulings. Every challenge failed. For Nathan Smith, the prosecutor for Benton County, the ruling carried more than legal significance. He said publicly that he hoped the decision would reduce the likelihood of Jersey's family having to face yet another courtroom, yet another proceeding, yet another reminder of what had been taken from them. His words acknowledged something that legal language often doesn't make room for, that justice is not just a verdict, it is also everything that comes after, and every reopening of a wound carries its own cost. Additional appeals followed. Ineffective assistance of counsel. Incomplete information provided to the jury regarding psychological history. None of them changed the outcome. The conviction remained in place. The sentence remained in place. The case was legally closed. From a different prison, Jersey's father David gave an interview in the years that followed. He spoke about what he had learned when he heard what happened to his daughter. He said he had never personally known Zachary Holly. He said that when the full reality of what had happened became clear to him, He struggled for a long time to process it. He talked about his addiction and how it had damaged his ability to be the father Jersey needed, not just in those final months of her life, but long before them. He didn't try to make himself sympathetic. He accepted, in his own words, that he had made devastating choices and that he would carry the weight of those choices for the rest of his life. He was already behind bars when his daughter died. He was not there to protect her. He cannot undo that knowledge, and he said as much. Here is what stays with me, and what I think will stay with you. Jersey Bridgeman was brave before most people knew her name. She was brave the first time, when she found the words to tell a child care professional what was happening to her in her father's house. When she described being restrained, being made to sleep on the floor, being controlled and hurt by the people who were supposed to be her protection. That took a kind of courage that most adults would struggle to find, and she found it at 6 years old. She was brave the second time, when she adjusted to a new home, a new school, a new routine after everything she had survived. When she started kindergarten and showed up with a smile that made sure you could see every single tooth. When she was gentle and watchful with her little sister Leah. The way children are when they understand, instinctively. That love is something you have to show. She was brave in the small, ordinary ways that don't get noticed, that don't get written about. The way she said, "I love you to the moon and back," every night, because she knew. The way children sometimes know things without being told, that you say it while you can. And the systems and people around her failed her. More than once, in different ways, by different people at different times. A father who restrained her, a stepmother who went along with it, a child welfare system that had 15 chances to intervene on behalf of the man who would eventually take her life, and didn't intervene enough or early enough to change what he became. And then, finally, a neighbor she trusted, a man who babysat her, who smiled at her, who stood behind the crime scene tape and shook his head alongside everyone else, who did the unthinkable. Evil, in this case, did not look like what most of us have been taught to look for. It did not arrive with warning signs that were obvious from a distance. It arrived with a familiar face and a friendly name and a routine that had been allowed to develop over months until it was completely ordinary. It arrived wearing the exact shape of something safe. That is the part of this case that I cannot fully make peace with, and I don't think you should be able to either, because the discomfort of that truth is also a form of protection. It keeps you paying attention to the things that other people might overlook because they seem too ordinary to be worth watching closely. Jersey deserved a full childhood. She deserved the chance to grow up and figure out what she loved and who she was, and how wide a life she could build for herself. She deserved to outgrow that bicycle on the curb. She deserved to trade the princess balloon for something a teenager would choose. She deserved to call Leah on the phone from somewhere far away, years from now, just to say, "I love you to the moon and back." She was 6 years old. In the memory of everyone who loved her, that smile is still there. The one that showed all her teeth. The one that came from somewhere genuine and deep and couldn't be faked. The part of her that nothing that happened to her, not the first time, and not the last time, could ever fully reach. She carried light even through the darkest circumstances of her short life. And the people who knew her mother, her grandmother, her teachers, the friends who left purple ribbons on their porches, they're the ones who make sure that light doesn't disappear just because she did. This story mattered. Jersey mattered. And if you made it to the end of this video, I want you to know that I see you and I appreciate you more than I know how to say. These are not easy stories to sit with, but they deserve to be told, and they deserve to be remembered. And that is what this channel exists to do. Before you leave, please take 5 seconds and like this video. It costs you nothing, and it means everything to how this content reaches people. Drop a comment below and tell me what part of Jersey's story hit you hardest. Was it the first chapter of her life? The investigation? The courtroom? Tell me, because every comment is a real person engaging with a real story, and that matters. Share this video with someone who watches true crime, because stories like this one deserve more than one viewer. And if you are not yet subscribed to Crime Motives, this is the moment. Hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, and come back for the next one. I'll see you there.